Good afternoon. I'm Katerina Sokou, your moderator for the next panel on the US-EU partnership in the Balkans and the prospects for Euro-Atlantic integration in the region. I'm very honored to be here. Thank you, Damon, for inviting me. And I would like, without further ado, to call to the podium for her opening remarks, one of the driving forces for raising attention in this country to the Western Balkans, and the first woman to have been both governor and senator for the state of New Hampshire, the Honorable Senator Jeanne Shaheen.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me just say at the outlet, I don't like United Airlines either. I understand that was quite a topic of conversation earlier. Well, I'm delighted to be here to talk about the importance of the Western Balkans and the relationship that the Transatlantic Alliance and the Balkans continues to share. Let me just say that I got interested in what was happening in the Balkans because of former Senator George Voinovich, who took me to the Balkans right after I got elected to the Senate and showed me the amazing resources of the country, the beauty that all of the Balkan region shares, the warm people, the creative energy that exists there. And I have since been a big fan and supporter of the challenges that you face and the importance of integrating the region and continuing your move towards the West. I want to thank Damon and Fred for organizing today's events. As everyone in this room knows, the Balkans region has come very far, but of course there's still a ways to go. Looking around the room, I'm heartened to see Balkan ministers, State Department officials, industry leaders, and regional experts coming together today to discuss the path forward. I want to begin commenting on last week's judgment against Ratko Mladic. I think this guilty verdict was not only long awaited, but it is close to a painful chapter in the history of the region and a reminder of the continued importance of United States leadership and working in strong partnership with the European Union. I think we owe it to those who lost their lives in the conflict to ensure that history never repeats itself, that together as a transatlantic community, we will continue to work towards a Balkans integrated, free, prosperous, and at peace. But of course, as all of you know so well, it's only the Balkan countries themselves that can launch the region forward. To do this, leaders and citizens alike must redouble efforts to prioritize the future and not spend time rehashing the past. You must kickstart prosperity and growth by leveraging technology, diversifying energy sources, increasing linkages, and pulling the region firmly together to tackle issues that are threatening the region from within: corruption, criminality, violent religious and nationalist extremism. And of course, as we all know, there is already a very strong foundation to build on. 4 Western Balkan states, including now Montenegro, are in NATO. 2 are EU members and 4 others are official EU candidate countries. So the whole region is traveling on the hard-fought road toward Euro-Atlantic integration and serves as a model for other post-conflict societies. This is why the United States and the EU will stand behind those nations with the strength, creativity, and selflessness needed to propel the Balkans forward. And each day, I think, brings a new reason to be encouraged. Just 2 months ago, 150 Serbian media organizations and NGOs showed their country what a world without independent media would be like by staging a blackout in defense of free press, something that we could benefit from everywhere in the world, I think. 1 year since the establishment of a joint chamber of commerce between the business communities of Serbia and Albania, trade between the two countries has increased by 40%, with exports and imports continuing on both sides. And just yesterday, European Enlargement Commissioner Johannes Hahn signaled the EU's intent to revitalize the enlargement process. I couldn't agree with Commissioner Hahn more in his statement that a new member state is not a burden, but an enrichment for our transatlantic community. Now, along with Senator Roger Wicker, who is a Republican from Mississippi, I am a Democrat from New Hampshire, so not only do we have bipartisan support there, but we have different regions of the country. We have introduced the Balkan Economic Partnership Act to help energize Balkan entrepreneurs and businesses. And I know there's been a lot of focus today on the importance of entrepreneurship and providing leadership for small businesses. Our bill would create an enterprise fund in Bosnia and Herzegovina to boost investments in small and medium-sized corporations and enterprises. And I think as Congress, we are committed to seeing this region flourish. In the wake of the Kremlin's assault on our democratic elections, bipartisan support for the Balkans and for EU integration have never been stronger. We are increasing funding to counter Russian malign influence in the Balkans. We are supporting youth exchanges, and we are promoting more business opportunities between our country and yours. But we know that these efforts will only be as successful as they are supported by leaders in the Balkan countries themselves. In Bosnia-Herzegovina, patience is running out for those who publicly challenge the unity of the state and who put ethnic and party interests above social, economic, and political reforms. Our message to Bosnia-Herzegovina is echoed in Serbia, Kosovo, and Macedonia. Every opportunity awaits you. NATO and EU membership await you. But old rivalries must be replaced with reform, with cooperation, with regional projects that bring jobs, investment, and clean business practices. And, you know, I stand before you as somebody who is now in a Congress that is very divided. So I understand the challenges. This is not easy. We are having these challenges, and we're in a democracy that's over 200 years old. But it's worth it to continue to figure out how to work together to move your countries forward. Across the region, it is time for leaders to make crucial decisions in support of their people's futures, or risk being left behind. The issues before us, democracy, rule of law, prosperity, clean governance, these issues are not new. We've been working on them together for more than 2 decades. But today, with growing challenges to Europe's south and in the east, the Balkans are really in the balance. As the Balkan nations set aside divisiveness and come closer together, I believe that this region will rise to meet these challenges. They will set the global standard for religious and ethnic tolerance and pluralism. Other nations with similar struggles around the world are certainly watching. So I hope together we can show them how it's done. Thank you all very much. I wish I could stay for the panel to hear what you all have to say, but sadly I have to go back for a vote. So thank you all very much.
Yeah, yes. Can you hear me well? Okay, great. So please allow me to introduce our panelists for this next discussion on the Euro-Atlantic integration and the cooperation partnership between the US and the EU to make that happen. I'm Next to me is His Excellency Ditmir Bushati, Minister. Oh, sorry, please. Excuse me about that.
We're
I
neighbors.
had the right. His Excellency Srdjan Darmanović, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Montenegro, and the Honorable Rosemary DiCarlo, President of the National Committee on American Foreign Policy. The Ms. Hedvig Morvai, Executive Director of the European Fund for the Balkans, and His Excellency Ditmir Bushati, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Albania. You all have 5 minutes. If we can start with Mr. Darmanović for the opening remarks, 5 minutes, and then we'll have questions.
Thank you very much. It's really an honor to be here today discussing European and Euro-Atlantic perspective of our region. And I wish really to thank the organizers of the conference at Atlantic Council for this very timely organized conference about how this region to continue to proceed its way to Euro-Atlantic integrations. I recall the time immediately after the end of the Cold War, when it seemed that the end of the geopolitical rivalry between the superpowers and an intensification of the integration process in Europe would bring the period of long, even permanent stability and prosperity. And there was even a talk about the end of history. We remember all of that. And the global triumph of liberal democracy. We actually felt as living in a completely new world, almost paradise. But in the time today, we now see that history has still can have a teeth, even in the most developed and the peaceful regions. The Euro-Atlantic area is again being confronted with serious political, economic, and security challenges. They are more diverse, more complex, sometimes even more dangerous than those we faced during the period of the Cold War. Consequently, the Western Balkans is facing the same or similar challenges, or these challenges in many ways are sometimes echoes of what's going on in the global perspective, global scene. The region has been historically recognized as a powder keg of Europe, or Ivan Krastev was talking about soft underbelly of Europe. But every generation have in living memory at least once outbreak of armed conflict based on ethnic, religious, or territorial disputes. Situation now is definitely better. We are not living in the 90s, and this tragic time is not going to come again. Last 15 years were generally the period of peace, stability, commitment of regional countries to integration process and good neighborly relations. But problems, however, still persist. And in the last months or years, there has even been certain deterioration, if I may say. There were disputes between Kosovo and Serbia, though on the other side, talks have never been broken. It is going on, but we are now standing at some new point to find a way how to proceed. As well as we can hear time to time disputes between federal entities in Bosnia, or ethnopolitics driving Bosnian leaders. My friend, Mr. Hodžaj, mentioned this demarcation, in many ways bizarre issue between Montenegro and Kosovo, but we believe that we believe in the democratic capacity of Kosovo institutions to resolve this issue. On the other side, Western Balkans has not yet developed sufficiently. Much work has to be done in the, for example, infrastructure, in connectivity, because if we don't develop, if we don't continue with the reforms, even security is deteriorating on that ground. Geopolitically, situation has changed as well in our region. From the 90s, where EU and NATO have been perceived as the only global players in our region, now there is a competition. Other players are stepping up with their activities, and very often malign activities, as Montenegro faced it a year ago. China and Turkey, for example, have increased their economic presence, economic investment. And Russia is, as we all know, doing even more. It considers the Balkans to belong to its own sphere of interests. To the extent that in 2014, Foreign Minister of Russia stated that any enlargement in the Balkans will be taken as a provocation for Moscow. It is when trouble started for the region and subsequently for us, as I mentioned in 2016. Most people know about these activities. I am not going to describe it in detail now, but it is very well known attempt of the coup d'etat, now under ongoing trial that is broadcast every day in front of a Montenegrin public. So we consider that the way how we should proceed is a transatlantic partnership in the region. So those players who have been our kind of direction in the beginning of the 90s to come back with the full power, and to become again a driving force in our region. Of course, with first of all us to do our part of the job. I think three crucial entities, NATO, EU, and United States, have to be aware that it won't be easy to do it as it was in the past. And it is also in the best interest of all transatlantic partners to have peaceful, stable region integrated in the European and Euro-Atlantic structures. Without stable Balkans, there is no stable Europe. We firmly believe that, and history taught us about it. And the stability of Europe has always been a cornerstone of European and American foreign policy since the end of the World War II. We are aware that the political and economic challenges, Brexit, terrorism, migration, hybrid threats, have forced European and Euro-Atlantic community to somewhat recalibrate their priorities and look more inwardly in the last period of time. But however, neglect of the region would make situation definitely worse, perhaps maybe irreparably so. So it would be devastating to shut the door of the EU and NATO. And it is also not enough to say the door is open. Someone have to pass through this door, as Montenegro did in June last year, what was a strong encouragement for the region. Our membership to NATO, that was our biggest achievement after independence of 2006, was also increased our security, stabilized our democracy, made us more secure towards foreign threats. But also it was a signal to the region that door is open, that enlargement of the NATO and EU in the region is not a done deal. And also it provided more stable, more secure Balkans, as with our part of the coast. Now the whole Adriatic and that part of the Mediterranean is under NATO umbrella. I also want to mention that Adriatic Charter, for example, has been a big success in the field of regional security cooperation. Because 3 members of the Charter, Montenegro, Albania, and Croatia, have become NATO allies since the Charter was established. Moreover, first Adriatic Charter Summit was held in August this year in Podgorica, and the results were extremely positive. All countries were united in their commitment to stability of the region and to its integration. The speech delivered by Vice President Mike Pence actually expressed unwavering commitment of the United States to the Western Balkan region, and I think this conference maybe is a further signal that the United States is, if I may say, coming back. They've never left, but but maybe coming back in a more decisive way. The other example is the EU with its Berlin process. Montenegro faithfully approach to the Berlin process, and as an excellent example of regional cooperation and finding a way how to cooperate economically and prepare ourselves better for the EU. And we are very much encouraged by the results of the Trieste summit in July. But we have always emphasized that the Berlin process should have never been perceived as any kind of the waiting room for the European enlargement, as the logic of like following, okay, you have your own small economic integration, cooperate among yourselves, and we'll see when the time will come to you to be members, or at best maybe you can enter into the EU as a region. We very much favor the other approach, the regatta principle, that any country will be evaluated by its merits, by the results, and Montenegro so far has been pretty successful in the European integration, opening 28 out of 33 chapters. We believe that we can open all the chapters until the end of the Bulgarian presidency until the half of the next year, the July next year, and that if the European Union showed commitment to the enlargement, that we might end up our work in, let's say, 4 to 5 years. So we believe that it's time now, facing the other geopolitical players, to show commitment to with the continuing reforms and reforming our societies, while the EU and NATO opening the doors. It is why Montenegro, as the next chair of the Adriatic Charter into 2018, will do its best to help Macedonia to continue their NATO drive. We don't want to say how Greece and Macedonia are going to resolve their problems. It's not up to us to answer that question. We also cannot do the job for Macedonians in terms of the reforms. But as long as Macedonia is ready, we believe that it is worth to try to help our friends, because we have to fight for the region now, country by country, piece by piece. I think it's a proper answer to the aspiration to the region showed by the other players. Maybe it's enough for the introductory part.
You're actually answering one of my first questions to you, which would be, as your recent experience of becoming a member of NATO, what would you think? How important do you think is for the rest of the countries that are aspiring members to join the alliance soon, and whether you think that might actually change the dynamics and the form of the alliance in the region, from a stabilization and peacemaking really process to someone that's to a region that actually contributes to the major issues of the day, be it Islamic terrorism, be it foreign fighters, be it the security and international operations of NATO across the world. Do you see this day coming sometime soon?
No matter how Montenegro is a small country, we believe that our membership to NATO made a difference, and we find our membership seriously. We are going to do our part, our obligation. We believe that one of the obligations is to support regional countries that aspire, the aspirants. Montenegro cannot probably exercise global foreign policy, but can try to help the region, first of all. And it is why I mentioned Macedonia. Of course, we are not going to forget our other duties in the alliance, like deterrence and defense, including Afghanistan participation. Participation is in the eastern front, in projecting stability, like maybe Poland, Baltic states, Romania, wherever it's necessary. We also invest in our security by making plan to reach 2% of our GDP for the defense until 2024. So this is all how we perceive our new membership and how we can contribute to the region. At the very end, I want just to remind of one historic event. Almost exactly 76 years ago, President of the United States and Prime Minister of Great Britain signed the Atlantic Charter, a historic document that paved a way to the defeat of fascism, as well as laid the foundation of transatlantic unity. It has been the truth ever since. Whenever the bond between the United States and Europe is strong, the world is a better place, more peaceful and stable. Whenever the ties that bind fray, instability occurs. So I believe now more than ever we need these ties to be strong and to be exercised in the Western Balkans as a part of Europe and as a part that can contribute to the European to its own stability and European stability. I'm moderate optimist and confident that we are up to it. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Ambassador DiCarlo,
thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. It's been a while since I intensively covered the Western Balkans when I was a Foreign Service Officer at the Department of State, 9 years to be exact. And a lot has changed since my tenure covering the Western Balkans. A lot of progress has been made, and Hoyi alluded to some of the progress in the last session. But the region hasn't really advanced as quickly as we thought it would have. Everyone today has talked about reasons why, just a few. Some of them are structural, lack of good governance, lack of rule of law. The region going through the same challenges that we're experiencing in the West. Some of them quite serious in areas that we haven't really known how to handle before, cyber, for example. And then I would also add that I think among the citizens in the Western Balkans, there is questioning about the viability of their membership in Euro-Atlantic structures, and maybe even the viability of the institutions themselves. Now, the region today is not on the brink of cross-border or internal violent conflict. I think that's clear. We shouldn't exaggerate. On the other hand, we do risk the emergence of fragile and very fragile states because of political and economic stalemates. We're dealing with a challenge of state building. I too sense the urgency for greater involvement by the United States and by the European Union, particularly by the United States. I mean, we see that young and old are leaving their countries of birth. Unemployment is very high, particularly among young people, and rising. Possibilities and concerns about increased radicalization, particularly of the young. A region awash in arms, rising nationalism, massive refugee flows. I could go on, but I won't. We also see that the state structures are weak and therefore susceptible to, frankly, unhelpful outside influences. Now, what does this mean? Eventually, I think the weakness of state structures of the states in the Western Balkans will have an impact on its EU neighbors, on its European neighbors. EU is already dealing with challenges internally, and additional challenges would certainly cause an extra burden. Strong EU is important to U.S. interests, and I agree completely with Minister Darmanović on this. We need a strong European Union, and the transatlantic alliance is incredibly important. We've seen when the US and the EU work together on a range of issues that we can be powerful and very successful. Now, you might ask, how realistic is it that in particular the United States is going to increase its activity in the Western Balkans, up the ante, if you will, given some of the issues we're dealing with not only internally, but also nuclear armed North Korea, rising China, resurgent Russia, volatile Middle East, and so on and so on. I would say that engagement in the Western Balkans is certainly in our interest. But more important, it's a modest investment on our part. A modest investment today will yield greater dividends tomorrow and in the future. Obviously, the EU has taken the lead and should take the lead. The U.S. role in the region has always been one more of political engagement, political pressure, if you will, outreach to civil society. All actions, frankly, that are not particularly costly and do not demand inordinate amount of time from high-level officials. But I do think there are 3 points that we really need to consider for our engagement to be effective. The first one is we do need a closer US-EU relationship on the Western Balkans. We need to be on the same page. We haven't always been on the same page. I think our goals have always been the same, our objectives were the same, but we didn't always agree on how to get to those objectives. And we need to come to terms with that now to be effective. Second, we do need a realistic path to the EU and NATO. To throw away our old talking points. Nobody is saying that the conditions should be different for the Western Balkans for membership. I would never say that. Obviously, every state has to fulfill the same requirements and the same conditions. However, there needs to be something that helps the countries as they're moving toward membership. For the European Union, perhaps some benefits coming earlier and others coming later. Some people have talked about a multi-speed approach to the EU, but certainly a need to keep the region engaged and show that the benefits of EU involvement. And for NATO, I would say that NATO perhaps could look at a way of bringing Bosnia-Herzegovina closer to NATO cooperation. Maybe rethink some of the conditions that have been put on Bosnia in the past. And then third, there is a need for visibility in the region. We need to show that we're there, that we're engaged. The EU representative this morning talked about needing to do a better PR job about what we're all doing. And I couldn't agree with him more. I was in Belgrade recently and learned that the majority of Serbs in a poll believe that Russia is the biggest financial donor to Serbia, when the European Union gives 12 times as much as Russia does. We have a problem here, which we need to correct. Now, the EU has made a significant contribution to the region, and the US has shown in the past that it can make a difference, and not just with military might. And a modest investment, as I said now, will make a considerable difference. If we leave a vacuum, someone else, someone with less benevolent objectives, will fill it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador DiCarlo. If I may follow up briefly and ask you, you talked about greater coordination. Do you think between the US and the EU? Can you give us any specific example of how that might actually work in practice, and what kind of leverage do you expect to have from that?
Let me just give you an example, and the example is Bosnia-Herzegovina. I think we've not exactly been on the same page about how to help Bosnia move forward to enact the reforms that it needs in order to reduce the layers of government, constitutional reform, if you will. And I think this is an area where we absolutely have to be together. I'm not saying the US is always right. In fact, I think we probably had some serious missteps in our past. In particular, the 2006 package on constitutional reform, which we championed, but the region, Bosnia-Herzegovina, was not ready for it. But I do think there is a need to sit together and to move forward. On the one hand, some of our measures, perhaps what the US might propose, might seem draconian to the European Union, but their process of chapters and opening chapters seems rather rigid to us.
Ms. Morvai.
Thank you very much. I mean, so many things have been said, so it's a bit of a challenge to find now a new angle of looking at things. However, I think I'm in a lucky position coming from the civil society and being an ordinary citizen of one of the countries of the Western Balkans, Serbia, and I also consider myself being a citizen of the region, as I'm dealing with regional cooperation for 15 years now. And I mean, for 2 decades, I'm heavily involved in democracy building in the region. And when I tell you that I'm becoming very much impatient about how developments go in the region, then you can take it seriously, because I'm definitely investing not only myself, not only professionally, but also personally, in bringing the necessary change, not only to my country, but to the entire region. And what Nikola Dimitrov mentioned about being for too long in the waiting room and facing new emerging problems in the region is, I think, a very, very important fact. Because what we can watch and witness now in the Balkans is a very, very complex situation, which was partly caused by the fact that we lost guidance. And in these times of very heavy and complicated global changes and the times of uncertainty, and when our anchor, the EU, is facing the challenges it is facing now since the financial crisis 2008 and then multiple crises evolving all these years, it was very difficult for the Balkan countries to remain on a steady course towards democracy building with the aim of developing these countries into stable and prosperous democracies. And let's also face another fact. I mean, why are we here today? How does it happen that these conferences were not held for so many years? Not in DC, not in other key even EU member states. The Balkans was somehow off the agenda until some problems emerged which put it back on the geopolitical agenda, starting with the heavy migration crisis and then the interference of other third actors in the region, which have been mentioned many, many times today. So we have to be aware of the fact that we are basically looking at the Balkans again through this lens, which is a completely new situation, while the main driving force, the EU accession process, which of course remains the only option which can bring these countries closer to its goal of stable and prosperous democracies, is basically doing a business as usual. It's having this approach and even bringing to a situation where the accession process was almost dead. And the EU considered somehow stability, keeping the Balkans stable, more important than really carefully looking into the developments which were going on. And that is why this term of stabilitocracy was recently launched as describing a situation where democracy was horse-traded in a way for the sake of stability in the Balkans. And this is why we are now having these emerging new problems which are very, very difficult to tackle. And let's face it, these are not so special. We are going with the trend. I mean, these problems are elsewhere very much present as well. So that is why the Berlin process was mentioned, and also the minister mentioned it. Such initiatives, new thinking is so much important to somehow move us from this business as usual path towards a situation where we consider the Balkans now in this new context, and we are trying to figure out solutions which can really bring some change. Because again, let's be honest, the EU accession process cannot cure all the illnesses which are out there. And as somebody else mentioned this morning, I think it was Dmitr Bechev, even if these countries or when these countries become EU member states one day, they won't be member states as Sweden or, I mean, any other well-developed democracy today. So the Berlin process was this inventive, a new type of initiative which brought hope to the region. And that is why it is so much appreciated. Not that much has been achieved. When I was giving an interview to the national television in Belgrade a few months ago, I couldn't answer the question about the real results because the journalist was insisting how many roads have been built since the Berlin process was initiated. And there is none, I think, so far. Because that is not how we can measure it. It has a completely different importance. It is the only political venue, high-level political venue, where the regional political leaders have the opportunity to meet key EU member states' political leaders and discuss the Balkans in a political way. And it keeps this process very important. And let's be also honest, our political leaders like the format. It works. There are over 78 regional initiatives. And this one is very much appreciated. On the other thing, again, what we can witness with the Berlin process and what we can witness with some other regional initiatives, that there is no real regional ownership over it. The countries, the governments of these countries are not really proactive in using it to its utmost potentials. So I would like to conclude with what I already mentioned, and that is that I think that novelties have to be introduced. I mean, it is 15 years after Thessaloniki, and it is 18 years after launching the stabilization and association process. It is really too much time being in the waiting room. So I think that the accession process must be, in a way, modified. It must become a more active and multi-layered process. There must be some new elements which will be introduced in it, which also understands a greater scrutiny of the rule of law and democracy. There should be independent reporting and monitoring process. There should be civil society more actively involved. And it also would give an opportunity, maybe, to introduce a major challenge and a major innovation to it if, for example, the chapters 23, 24 would be screened for all the Western Balkan 6 countries, and after screening, with all countries, the negotiation process would be opened. It doesn't mean that the regatta principle would not remain. It would just mean that negotiations are open with all countries of the Western Balkans, and that way we would maybe avoid also the problem with the laggards. Because again, let's face another fact, and that is we have the front runners, and we have Kosovo and Bosnia, which are struggling due to very complicated political issues in the process. So there should be some innovations to also create a kind of a regional competition. What we witnessed, for example, with the visa liberalization process. At one point, it was so important for the countries of the region to fulfill the criteria which was out there, and they were helping each other in a way. They were actively communicating and cooperating on reaching these criteria, but also competing about coming to the end. There should be also a process where enlargement is thought out as being part of the future design of the European Union, because this is what is happening now. We all have to see what type of an EU will these countries join one day, and these countries should be part of rethinking the EU today, and not only as aspiring states, but also as real partners to the EU in this process. And I think that when looking at the troubles in the region and how to move things forward, we should look a bit beyond enlargement. As I said, it should be considered as a main driving force, but there should be some new momentums which could show the real progress. If we just look at enlargement through this chapter opening, closing lens, it is very frustrating. And this is how it goes. So there should be something more tangible and more motivating for these societies to support the needed, very much needed reform processes.
You remind me of a poem of the Greek poet Konstantin Kavafi, Ithaca, where he implies that the trip, traveling to get there, is at least as important as the destination, but that requires some maturity from the civil society as well, and the politicians, frankly, But I'm wondering, you've been with the European Fund for the Balkans since its very inception, Frank. And you talked a little bit about the challenges of regional cooperation and promoting that. What about your successes? Do you have something to share that could really be an example? I'm not asking for roads, but something that can actually, you think, could be a success.
Maybe
that.
Bridges.
You mean successes in the region?
Mm-hmm.
Well, yes, definitely. Basically, I mentioned the visa liberalization process. I think it was a real success for the region, and it showed a lot about how developments can go fast and changes if there is a clear goal. And now I think that this willingness of the countries to participate in the Berlin process and advance regional cooperation in a completely different format is something what is very, very positive. I would single out the will to solve bilateral issues. It was part of the Vienna summit back in 2015. Then it was a bit sidelined from the consecutive summits. However, it remained a very strong part of the Berlin process. And if we look at this issue, not so much at the political level, because it's sensitive, so I mean, not even the host governments of these summits like very much to put it in the focus. But if we look at how those people from these ministries of foreign affairs, and I would here include the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Albania especially, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Macedonia, are willing to work on the technical level, and also Montenegro, whereby in Vienna actually there was an agreement signed, which involved Montenegro or even two?
It was, yeah, with Bosnia and Herzegovina it was resolved. And we also signed an agreement with
yes.
Kosovo and ratified in the parliament. We are still waiting for the ratification
yes.
in the Kosovo parliament.
So what I want to say is that there is readiness in the region even to address highly complicated and political issues in the regional setting. So I think that regional cooperation is something what is very much happening and what is very vivid. However, of course, good news are never communicated well, so it is the fact with the regional cooperation as well. And that is why, again, I think the Berlin process is so important, because it highlights these positive momentums which are out there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Minister Bushati, may we have your remarks, please?
Thank you. I would like to echo on some of the points that have been presented also by the other panelists, but first I would like to say that it's always a pleasure to come back here, and Atlantic Council is, I consider, as a platform for discussion and also knowledge on Euro-Atlantic integration. It's a house where we can learn from each other and we can share our own experiences, and I would like to thank once again the organizers for keeping the door open to all of us. I've been listening quite carefully to all the panelists, and we were speaking about the region, and we like to speak about the region, but I'm afraid we are not yet a region. And I remember I've had more or less the same thesis when I appeared for the very first time here in this house, because formally speaking, yes, situation in the Balkans it's much more stable than it used to be 10, 15, 20 years ago, of course. Formally speaking, all Western Balkan countries are aspiring to become EU members. You have 4 official candidates. You can play with Western Balkan countries in different baskets. You can even call Macedonia and Albania professional candidates if you would like. When you see this process, when we started for the very first time, it looked a little bit distant. Then in '96, all countries in the region, including Albania, were offered an Europe agreement, like Bulgaria and Romania signed at the time with European Union. But then many things happened, internal, external, which affected also our region. And secondly, if we speak about Euro-Atlantic integration, you have members of NATO like Croatia, Montenegro, Albania. No one was mentioning Kosovo here. Kosovo is seeking desperately to have an institutionalized relationship with NATO. NATO is not able to offer or to be in a creative mood as EU has been with Kosovo. There has been decisions that have been taken within the framework of NATO. We as foreign ministers were not able to deliver on Kosovo for obvious reasons, because of non-recognizers. There are countries like Serbia that are sitting in two chairs. There are statements coming from different officials, from different offices in the West, but it's a fact. Nobody is able to prevent this. It's a reality. Then you've got Bosnia, and I'm afraid Rosemary was advocating more on Bosnia's path towards NATO than Bosnia's officials themselves, because in the last 2 years I have noticed that that representatives of governments from Bosnia, and here I'm referring Bosnia and not different and various structures, are not advocating anymore Bosnia joining NATO. So when it comes to these two elements, it is very difficult to speak about a true region. And this is also reflected in the way how our region is responding to different challenges. If you analyze, for instance, the level of alignment of foreign policy position to that of European Union, although 4 candidate countries do have a responsibility to align their foreign policy positions, with the exception of Albania and Montenegro, the other 2 don't do it. Gruevski was going backwards, and here I see my Macedonian friends. Every time I come here to Atlantic Council, he will have a question or he will disagree with me. I hope this will be the case again tonight. But this has been the situation in the Balkans, and the first challenge, in my opinion, is how to transform Western Balkans into a true region, politically, economically, and security-wise. Then there is also another element which I would like to touch upon. We should not fall on the trap of chapters, and here I agree with Hedvig, because we have a situation in the region where you don't always find a correlation between the chapters or the speed and the quality of the accession process. And you don't find this. The senator was mentioning the freedom of media, which is a very important topic in our region. Nobody is able to tell that a certain country, which appears to be on the accession table or appears to be a front runner, has transformed itself. We don't want to become Sweden. It's impossible for us to become Sweden. Maybe it's impossible for southern members of European Union to become Sweden. But it's important to show this trajectory. And sometimes I get maybe it's my wrong impression that EU is happy with certain leaders who are able to deliver, but failed to democratize the society and failed to give a direct contribution for the democratization process in the society. Therefore, it's very difficult to see this correlation between chapters being opened and democratization cycle. It is by no accident that you see more or less the same leaders, you see more or less the same political establishment in the region. And now we are entering also into this period of the network of tribunals and special prosecution units in all Western Balkan countries, taking inspirations maybe from the experiences of Romania and Croatia. And there is all these paranoid discussions in towns, because the common denominator of all these processes have to do with the reshuffling of the public scene in all our societies. And this is a painful exercise for our societies. In terms of challenges, no matter whether Montenegro has opened 28 chapters and Albania is about to sit in the accession table, we are more or less facing the same challenges. Internally, weak institutions and rule of law related challenges, corruption and organized crime, ethnic tensions. We have noticed last year in Mitrovica and Republika Srpska, economic disparity, and there is a widening gap, not between Western Balkans and Western Europe, but we are experiencing a widening gap between Western Balkans and the so-called new EU member states. There is also a difference in the way how different EU members are having access to the funds. I'll never forget the discussion I had with former President of Bulgaria. He was telling me that they are getting structural funds from European Union, and for them it's easier to go for infrastructure projects than Serbia, because Serbia has to rely only on the state budget money. So, which brings neighbors into a difficult situation. And it's sometimes, believe me, it's quite unpleasant to hear neighbors telling to us, you belong to Europe, you belong to Europe, you have a European destiny. We are neighbors, we know that. But how this is being translated into concrete terms, nobody is able to tell us. And then we're entering also into a quarreling, who is being mentioned the first, who is sitting the first, who is the front runner. Hedvig said that we like Berlin process. You know why? There is no quarrel on how to sit around the table when Angela Merkel is calling leaders of the Balkans, because of the German presence, because of the German leadership. But if we are calling each other, I'm afraid old habits die hard. We start quarreling about who is sitting here, whether we would use national symbols, and so on and so forth. And then we lack having a proper, substantial discussion also with our partners. What is my proposal for the discussions? At least there would be 3 areas where I see the contribution of United States and the coordination between United States of America on one hand and European Union on the other hand, very important. I heard yesterday Secretary Tillerson was saying that Europe should write its next chapter in the history by itself. It's very nice. It's very nice, and I hope this is instigating more solidarity within European Union. But what we learned from the last 25 years is that American presence in our neighborhood, in Europe, is indispensable. Is indispensable for issues related to security reforms. Albania is a case in point. The whole transformation of intelligence service has been made through a close cooperation and partnership with the United States. This is not the case yet in many Western Balkan countries. It is not yet the case in Macedonia, where we have seen intelligence service playing politics, being part of political games publicly. It is not yet the case in Serbia, where you clearly see the influence of the so-called third actors in the intelligence service. It is not yet the case in Bosnia, and we need to complete this cycle because this is very important, no matter whether our countries will belong to European Union one day or not. Second, justice reforms and rule of law related reforms, or I can put it in a bigger framework, economic rule of law related reforms. Here, US needs to be a little bit more present, as it was the case with my country, with Albania, whereas European Union has the soft. And if we speak about chapters 23 and 24 and obligations emanating from those chapters, we have to have a clear view on what is going to be the situation in our societies in 2 years' time, in 4 years' time, in 5 years' time. Not just to have this formal screening where we are competing with each other, who is drafting the laws in a more speedy way. And the third element is the economic development. And this is my very last point. Last 2 years, we have been working closely with European Union as foreign ministers coming from candidate countries. Every 6 months, we are together with foreign ministers of European Union. And you know what were the topics we have discussed for the last 2 years and a half? Terrorism, migration. So it has been only crisis management mode. But we were quite successful. So Western Balkans was acting as a security provider for the whole architecture of Europe, security architecture of Europe. But how it comes, we are unable to work on a compelling narrative that would bridge the gap between Western Balkans and European Union. Rosemary was highlighting the fact that people are fleeing from the Balkans. This is because of the lack of a clear economic perspective. And we ought to be focused very much our efforts on this point too.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bushati. I had more questions, but I want to make sure I open the floor to our audience for their own questions to you. So if you could just please, if anyone, yes, please, at the back of the room.
Hi there, Kurt Baziner from Democratization Policy Council. I want to follow on what you said, Minister Bushati, and I appreciate your candor. I sense that there's a credibility deficit in the region at the popular level quite a bit with the West, and it's differentiated. That, you know, and the United States has credibility because of what it's done. The EU conceives of its own credibility because of what it is, but that is not necessarily translated to citizens in terms of a constituency. So I'd like you or any other panelists to talk about how you can see the West, liberal democracies, actually building a constituency at the popular level. Because we have lost credibility on that front because we haven't headlined it. The main angle of attack has been transactionalism. Look at all the good stuff you'll get if you join, rather than as a community of values. And I think that's been underplayed, and I'd like to hear what you have to say about that. Thank you.
Yes, please. Whoever wants to take it, we have 2 minutes for coffee break, I guess, so it has to be quick.
So maybe it was directed to him.
Minister Bushati.
Yeah.
In my humble view, it has to do with the quality of life. Nowadays, it's very difficult to speak about liberal democracy. I will never forget the experience of the last 2 years, where we had to pass a massive justice reform, which was accompanied with the constitutional amendments and the passing in the parliament of 7 framework laws, according to which all judges at various levels will go under reevaluation procedure. And I was receiving, as a foreign minister, also colleagues coming from different EU member states. And I will never forget discussions I've had with them. Some of them were very much surprised and shocked by the fact that we had decided to work with Venice Commission, that we had decided to bring international experts into this process. For them, this was unacceptable. This was a breach of sovereignty. And we were always told that, you know, there is no anymore a set of Western norms as being accepted internationally speaking, because there could be also other actors which are offering you more comfort, caviar, champagne, a vertical approach on the way how to direct the interest or money coming from the state budget, and why you have to make all these efforts on behalf of whom. And I don't know whether I would be able to clearly convey my message. But nowadays, you don't go to your constituency and saying that, look, you know, I have passed these laws. We have opened all these chapters with the European Union, and now you have to trust us. Even in Germany, our counterparts are saying that politics is bread and butter. So what I'm able to offer to the citizens. And this is the point that Hedvig made also about the Berlin process. Yes, it helped us to have a different climate in our region. But if I'm asking the parliament about the numbers of projects that have been implemented, it's very difficult to show numbers of projects that have been implemented. So we have to be clear on that. I'm not worried at all by the fact that Serbs are thinking that Russia is the main donor in Serbia. Because I know also other Poles that are saying that Serbs would like to join European Union. And European Union is much more attractive nowadays outside the borders of European Union than inside the borders of European Union. And Balkans is a case in point. So my plea is how we can better synchronize our efforts in helping each other to bridge this gap, because 2 decades have been passed. We are elected only for 4 years in office, and it's very difficult. It's very difficult to deliver, and it's very difficult to speak to the young generation and saying that, look, by 2030, this connectivity map that we all agreed under the Berlin process will be implemented. So let's sacrifice, because by 2030 we'll see this in reality. So these are some elements which we need to take into consideration.
If I may finish on an upbeat message, I mean, the last few days, Secretary Tillerson expressed the U.S. recommitment to Europe and to the Western Balkans, working with the EU for that reason. From the European Union, we heard the statements of Commissioner Hahn that Senator Shaheen mentioned about actually there being more interest and willingness from the European Union for enlargement next year compared to last year or currently. And Federica Mogherini talked about 2018 being a window of opportunity, both actually for Albania and with the Western Balkans in general. So the political will seems to be there, and I'm hoping that your experiences and your input will be taken into account for further integration within the EU and Atlantic Alliance. Thank you very much. Thank you. And if you can join us for coffee.